Hi, welcome to this special production from the Atos scientific community. Today we are talking about decarbonization and specifically how the oceans and seas can help us with carbon capture. So my name is Alexa Muller and I have three colleagues from the Atos scientific community with me. Let me welcome Friso Jankowski.
Hi, great to be here with you, Alexa.
And hi, Andy Wallace.
Hi, Alexa. Hi, Friso, and hi, everybody.
And a warm welcome to John Hall.
Hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today.
So Andy, let me start with you. Why are we talking about marine environments today?
Well, the seas cover 70% of the planet's surface, so perhaps marine environments offer a more extensive environment than land-based ecosystems for such as forests and peatlands for conservation activities such as carbon capture.
Okay, that sounds interesting, but is there any evidence to support your hypothesis that seas have a greater carbon capture potential than forests do?
Well, the evidence is mounting up. So the science suggests that rapidly growing marine plants such as seagrasses and kelp not only capture carbon faster than their land-based counterparts, but also that they keep their carbon locked in, because as the plants die, they become sediments which are then laid down on the seabeds. And in fact, our colleagues in EcoAct have developed a project to protect seagrasses in the Mediterranean for precisely this reason.
Wow. So, Friso, may I turn to you now? You have been carrying out a lot of experiments to measure the carbon capture potential of algae. So, how does that work?
Well, yeah, starting out with that, I love that topic. So I always bring the story why I'm doing this. I'm a scuba diver and I wanted to do something for the oceans. And when we started our research on decarbonization, I was thinking there must be something we could do with the ocean environments because they're dying. You hear over-acidification, dying off of the reefs. And on the first hand, I thought restoring reef structure itself might help also in regards of decarbonization. But I pretty soon found out that right now the reefs are even releasing back carbon out into the water column and then back into the atmosphere. And being honest, I'm based in Vienna and we do have one problem. We don't have an ocean. And even as we are speaking about the climate drift, I hope that also will not change in the near future. So I was thinking about like what else is there? And there's one thing I have to mention. I'm also the owner of the most ugliest saltwater tank on earth that even exists. Like people asking me, it's like, you neglecting that tank? It's like, no, I'm doing research. So that is really to understand how coral grow, but also how different things can come up in the water column and what you can do on a natural way to keep the water parameters right. One of them was a research on cyanobacteria, which none of the saltwater keepers ever wants to have. And this is what brought me to blue-green algae and cyanobacteria as it is in fact. And right now, I'm doing some research on a species called spirulina. You might have heard of spirulina, which is also known as one of the superfoods. And I was really interested in how that grows. So I started building my own little homemade photobioreactor, which is quite a funny thing. So you just have a glass tube with the light and it grows. And, spirulina takes up nitrates, phosphates, some other stuff we want to get rid out of the water. And it uses sunlight. So producing photosynthesis to create the biomass of itself. And this is how it really looks like, that stringy things. That's why it's called spirulina. The amount of carbon it takes out of the atmosphere is just like amazing. And right here, you see how that project evolved time after time. And this is also a project I've done with my kids on just really finding out how you can do beach cleanups and how you can start evolving on that. But going back on the topic of spirulina, it's said that it can be as much as effective as like about 400 times as the trees are. And when you think about the water column, which we can measure, that's a pretty interesting thing to do. And you also saw in the pictures that within days, the culture just grew and grew and grew. The good thing is I could harvest it, I could dry it. And so I had dry biomass of real carbon right here at home. And that was quite interesting. So now we're trying to find out what else we could do to really use that sequestered carbon and just do something like food supplements. It's absolutely great fertilizer. And you can do even things like creating bioplastic or flip-flops. It was just announced that their company could create flip-flops out of that. And just imagine that really at the end of your vacation, you could take your flip-flops and throw them into the water column and don't have a bad feeling on that. And on the other hand, there are millions of flip-flops that are washed ashore the beaches every year. So that's just one part of it where I'm really enthusiastic about that.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, looking at how much or how often these things break, that would be really cool if you could just release them back and it's no harm to the environment. So you've been really busy.
That's right.
And your family as well. So I can see how the protection of undersea ecosystems will have some benefit of the environment. But what about the people who live and depend on the oceans?
Right, right. Well, that's another topic. It's really, as I said, right here, I don't have any ocean where I can go into projects, but really it is about the things you can do all around that. So, and a very important thing is protecting the seabeds. We might not think about that, but our seabeds are long-term sequestering places or storages right now for carbon already. And I already mentioned that the over-acidification of our oceans just means that there is too much CO2 in the water column. So what we want to do and what we really want to emphasize on and should be aware of, that protecting seabeds to allow like seagrass, kelp, and other marine plants to grow, just have a lot of other side effects in a very positive way. One of them, of course, is that diversity and complexity of the life forms it saves there. But on the other hand, we have to think about trawling and leisure activities that stir up sediments, and those sediments just kill animals and plants, covering, for example, reef structures in sand that is stirred up. So one part of that is also that the animals die, and on the other hand, it releases gases back into the water column and later on also back into the atmosphere. One part is also the food supply chain. We heard about overfishing the oceans, more than 90% decline in different types of fish, shark culling and all that. So we just should also think of the biomass as a fish, a sort of a storage of carbon itself. So when we think about marine protected areas, they produce about like a lot of way more biomass over just a couple of years. Research found out that within 3 years, the amount of fish or other biomass doubles or triples. And in long-term research found out that really marine protected areas have like 6 to 7 times higher biomass and diversity, and even lightly protected areas have about 3 to 4 times higher biomass, and that's really a storage of carbon. That also protects jobs. There are a lot of jobs in fishery that really rely on that. And commercial fish catches at the boundary of the sites of those marine protected areas just show that it gets more sustainable, and the volume of fish they can catch increases over time, and it stays at that amount over time. And all of that saves us money. Economic research shows that about every dollar that we invest in projects like marine protected areas or just special projects with our partner EcoAct, not just double up, they can even bring in a return from up to $20. On the other hand, trolling and that's exploiting fish catching, that's really costing us a lot of money, and that's about $980 million over 25 years, which is just like really enormous. Just a few examples to see what else can be done and what side effects there are.
Okay, so it sounds like seagrasses and seaweeds seem really promising for carbon capture. So are there any other types of environment or plants that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So together with the seagrass meadows, mangroves and tidal wetlands are also really good at capturing carbon at a rate greater even than some of the tropical forests. In some countries, Vietnam is a notable example, thousands of hectares of mangrove have been torn up to make space for shrimp fisheries, as the people see that as a great way to make a living. But actually protecting those environments can help people to make a living too. With species like the mangrove crab being a high value product that can generate money for local communities, and not just providing an incentive for those local communities to protect rather than tear up those mangrove environments, by giving them a high-end product which can be sold for the tourism market or export market. But also, those crabs are actually really good filter feeders, cleaning up the environment within the mangrove, keeping the water clean, and having a great and beneficial impact on recycling nutrients and reducing pollution. So it creates environment benefit for the communities, for the environment, and for the atmosphere.
Okay, I think we can all see how forests such as mangroves can be protected if there is political will and sufficient funding. Trees are easy to see with the naked eye, and forests grow at precise geographical coordinates. But surely seaweeds and other algae move around in the ocean with the currents. So what evidence is there that marine protection works?
Yeah, and this is something that people have been really thinking about in terms of carbon offsetting regimes and such like, and that's why we see this as so much mature when we protect areas of forest, because absolutely plankton or free floating organisms will drift in and out of marine protected zones with the currents. But actually many marine plants do anchor themselves to the seafloor, and there's lots of examples of organizations working to protect habitats or regrow those denuded environments. And in fact, just recently, we've been talking to colleagues and friends at the Ocean Conservation Trust, learning how to, capture the seeds from flowering seagrasses and learning how to replant those in denuded areas. There have been efforts to protect kelp forests in California, which have resulted in species such as sea otters returning. In Tasmania, researchers are working on methods to help restore those kelp forests into areas which have completely lost them. And I was reading recently about one of those areas where they've started to rebuild the kelp forest, and just as they were filming, the dolphins started to emerge because there was more for them to eat when they came to those regrown areas. And so, we've seen that organizations right around the world, here in the UK, the Ocean Conservation Trust, we're learning how to do that. We're learning how to collect seeds, how to research and restore those denuded and lost seagrass meadows and kelp forests.
So, John, can I turn to you now? How much carbon are we talking about?
Okay, Alexa. Well, the seas are a hugely important part of the whole carbon cycle. And it's not surprising, Andy mentioned they cover 2/3 of the surface of the planet. But we don't often think about them as being a huge part of that natural process from a carbon perspective. But just through natural processes, the oceans absorb over 2 gigatons of carbon per year. That is huge. And it's unlikely that we can have significant initiatives that are going to change that massively. But the important thing is that we don't destroy the delicate balance that exists in the marine environments. If we just look at kelp beds, they are able to sequester around an estimated 200 megatons of carbon per year. That is significant. When we look at seagrasses, the equivalent rate per hectare that they can sequester is even higher than kelps. So there is an opportunity for us to have an influence. But again, I would say it's really important that we keep things in balance. And as has been hinted at by both Andy and Friso, there are behavioural changes that we can implement to help stop lasting damage that can come through fishing or leisure activities or whatever. And we need really to understand how the oceans work better, because it is a complicated balance. As Friso mentioned, reefs can be seen as carbon sinks, but they also produce CO2. So how on earth do we make sure all those things are in balance?
Okay, so the three of you've showed, okay, oceans can capture carbon through natural processes, and you've also shown how we can promote and extend those natural processes through protection of marine environments, for example. But coming from Atos, so what part does digital technology play in this?
Okay, this is absolutely the heart of the issue for us, at least as an organisation. You know, what can we do usefully to benefit this whole process, to create a positive impact here? And I would say there's kind of two aspects that we need to look at, Alexa. First is how can digital technology help us understand what's going on, understand how we're impacting either positively or negatively, how we keep that balance right. And here, technologies like the Internet of Things can come into to play. So already there are marine laboratories placing sensors on data buoys at critical parts of the ocean, measuring things like temperature, salinity, acidity of the water, amount of dissolved oxygen, and so on, so that we can begin to understand what impacts we're having negatively on from our behaviours, but also the actions that we're putting in place to try and reverse those problems. What degree of impact are they having? Plus, also we've got technologies like satellite imagery or pictures from drones that can help us understand what's going on in the water. And of course, Atos has created the Mundi data platform that takes satellite imagery from the European Space Agency, makes it available for people to analyze and use to understand things like, well, how are kelp fields growing? What is the water clarity and water quality like in certain areas? So digital can really help us understand what's going on. And then I think as we take it to the next level, using digital to help us understand what we should be doing and could be doing to improve the situation, we can start using things like artificial intelligence, machine learning to take the imagery and the sensor data that we've got, start to unpick what's going on, maybe even through the use of digital twins, start to simulate what could happen if we did this or if we didn't do the other. Because for me, the real value of digital is helping us to understand the knock-on implications in what is a very complicated and finely balanced ecosystem. It helps us avoid just dealing with specific situations in isolation, but looking at the potential and the problem as a whole.
So in other words, technology can also indirectly help us in this effort. Friso, do you also have a view on that, especially taking your experience into mind?
Well, yeah, sure. I do have something, and like I said, I love doing experiments, and I do love to make it like in person and to really get my hands on and even get my hands dirty, as you saw in that image with my kids. And that's also an example of what you could do. Yeah, helping people to engage with the oceans, whether in schools, community, scientific research establishment. It's about changing the people's behavior. And also the example I brought up here with my kids in the back, it started with a communication about using straws in their drinks. They wanted to have a straw, and that's maybe a simple first world problem you might have encountered with your kids. And then I told them about what could happen with the straw, especially if you are near the oceans, and that it could even end up in the stomachs of different animals like turtles. And they wanted to know more about that and what they could do. So we started a beach cleanup, and you say that. And within 30 minutes, we just collected that half a full trash bag. And we also found a ghost net. We just brought out of the water. It was already washed ashore. And they started to understand. And this is also when people start understanding and being more aware of the impact, that really makes a difference. Well, if you don't have kids at hand and are at the beach, you can also go and partner up with organizations like the Ocean Conservation Trust, because they are also trying to put digital information and bottle all that and provide that to communities, also being it in schools where you can learn about that, and in sort of gamification, education programs, beach cleanups, and you can get involved in that. And communication about that is just used by digital technology and digital tools, which can spread the word way more easily all over the world.
Well, I can totally relate to that straw example with my kids. Um, Thanks for sharing that, and also how cool your kids are
Sure.
helping you there. Really nice example. So we've talked about how digital technology can help us build on natural processes. Are there any new technological advances that can help us to use the ocean to safely capture carbon more directly?
Sure. So I think that researchers all over the world are looking at that issue right now. And there's a huge number of emerging ideas. But of course, one of the big challenges is how to make them big enough. Friso talked about his algae experiments and, how do we scale this up to the sort of gigaton level? So I'll just talk about one of the things that has excited me most, a process called single-step carbon sequestration and storage, which is a bit of a mouthful, so they also call it SCS2, which has been developed by the University of California in Los Angeles. Now, the basic idea is simple. So the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed in the sea is in equilibrium with the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. So if you take carbon out of the sea, then it will respond by absorbing the corresponding amount from the atmosphere, restoring the carbon balance in the sea, and of course depleting the air of carbon dioxide. So what SCS2 is doing is to use a catalyst mesh for electrolysis of seawater in a continuous flow across the mesh, which initiates a series of chemical reactions, which can then start to form magnesium and calcium carbonates in much the same way that marine invertebrates manufacture their own seashells. So this is a fascinating new technology. And John, I think we were talking about, some of the other positive aspects of this as well, weren't we?
Indeed, Andy. One of the really interesting kind of byproducts, as it were, of that process that you've described is the production of hydrogen, which of course has huge potential as an energy source, a very clean energy source, maybe an alternative to battery storage, battery energy storage through the use of hydrogen fuel cells to power cars, maybe even data centers. We have hydrogen powered data centers now. And of course, the byproduct of using hydrogen as an energy source is pure water. So there is zero carbon production. So having an understanding of how we can bring together all these different technologies to create a greater whole is hugely important in the fight against climate change. Many ideas out there. Some of them are promising. Maybe not all of them have the ability to deliver benefit at the kind of megaton or gigaton range. But if we can join them all together and create a much bigger picture, then I think we're well on the way to starting to tackle the problem that's ahead of us.
Wow, John and Andy, that sounds fascinating. It certainly seems as if we need to pay more attention to the oceans in our fight against climate changes. And we monitor these new developments closely to see how they develop and how digital companies such as Atos can help to promote and accelerate this work. But in the short term, do you have any suggestions for myself, for our clients, for how they can promote healthy oceans and the contribution that they can make towards decarbonization?
Yeah, sure. I would like to take that over because, that's really about engagement. That's so important to do and so important to look on. So there are some things which I would say. Firstly, customers should consider that taking marine protection project as part of their journey to net zero. There are possibilities out there already. It's like also with our partner EQUAC. They are doing projects that are so interesting and bring out things you might never have thought of and are sometimes way more effective than the simple step, which is also a great way offsetting by planting new trees. So by investing in marine protection, they will help to fund this vital area of research. And that's also an excellent way of using funds maybe generated from offsetting programs or internal carbon pricing. Secondly, they should consider supporting the work of organizations, like I mentioned, the Ocean Conservation Trust, but there are other organizations like that worldwide, what you can engage with. You can partner up, you could create digital material for your company that all your employees could create that awareness and help supporting it. So creating the awareness amongst the stuff. And well, finally, it wouldn't be me if I wouldn't say, like, start doing your own experiments. You saw what I did. I just started that in Vienna at home, just like a glass tube. And yeah, it might happen that we find out ways. Now we're talking about and trying to find out how IoT sensors and artificial intelligence can help make a better growth for that algae cultures. So yield management in a way so we can sequester more CO2 in that. And if we find ways that it is really very, very effective, so using low amounts of energy with a high amount of biomass, that might even be a thing to scale up. So you might find it, whatever, taking out CO2 out of offices, out of the fans of big plants and all that. So that's where it might go to. And yeah, so own experiments will lead the way. And well, there are so many different things you can consider about marine decarbonization and protecting marine areas that will help out on that. That's just my take.
Thank you. It's great and fascinating what everyone can do, even though not living close to coasts. And you're like the perfect example for that. So thanks for sharing that and also giving that impulses that all of us can actually start thinking about. And maybe not everyone has this tank, but yeah, there are possibilities for all of us. So with that, we conclude this video. This is the first of our series of videos to illustrate what some of our research in the Atos scientific community is about and how digital technology can support the journey to net zero. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.